Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third youth panel. So we're speaking about the power of identity for Jewish unity. But this is actually a very futuristic panel because the only in-person participant is the moderator. Of course, the panelists are far more important, and I look forward to handing over to you as and when online. I'm Vladimir Berman. I'm a member of the World Jewish Congress JD Corps and a businessman in my private life. Okay, so with that, let me hand over to each of the panelists in turn, and I'll invite you to introduce yourselves and perhaps give a 5 or so minute overview of your thoughts on the subject, both identity and unity, or perhaps the combination thereof. We'll try to keep the conversation as interactive as possible, and we'll take questions from the floor, from the participants. And if any of you want to react to what others are saying, please raise your hand. So with that, maybe we'll start with my very good friend, Natasha Hausdorf in the UK.
Good morning, Vlad, our panelists in the audience. It's very good to be with you. I'm desperately sorry that it wasn't possible to be with you in person this morning, but the wonders of modern technology are able to facilitate unity across jurisdictions and make sure that we can have this important discussion this morning. And I know that our conversation this morning is taking place on the back of all of the youth panel discussions yesterday. I was sorry not to be able to join those, but I think the subject matter of all of the panels across the youth conference really ties in very well together on the subject of the future of Jewish community life around the world. And in particular, I imagine there's been an awful lot of input from the Russian Jewish community. And I look forward to hearing more about that in lieu of being able to be in Moscow in person. I have been a member of the Jewish Diplomatic Corps for a number of years now, and have had the opportunity of meeting wonderful fellow JDs, some of whom are on the panel this morning, and the opportunity of connecting to other communities around the world in the course of my time. I should say that in my day-to-day life, I practice as a barrister in London, and I also have the great privilege of serving as the legal director of the UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust. And I think it's my experience in dealing with Israel, and in particular, the objects of UK Lawyers for Israel, which has at its heart protecting the interests of the Jewish community, combating anti-Semitism in particular, in the way that it is often in the modern times targeting Israel, that it has influenced certainly my own appreciation and understanding of the importance of Israel within Jewish life and across unifying communities around the world. And so in the few minutes available this morning, I thought I'd kick off with a few thoughts, perhaps, on the focus of Israel in unifying Jewish communities, and how I hope that as we move forward, that can be a real source of strength, and as I say, unity as opposed to division. Unity, I think, has always been a strong part of Jewish identity, and Israel has for so long been at the center of that. We're all familiar with the phrase, Kol Israel Aravim Zeh Lezeh. And that is, I believe, a very powerful factor in the history of the Jewish community. But it is, of course, only in the recent history that there has been the existence of the Jewish state as such a powerful force for unity within the Jewish community worldwide. And it strikes me as the common thread, the glue, if you will, that holds together what is perhaps increasingly quite a diverse and disparate global Jewish community, Orthodox, secular, left, right, Ashkenazim, Sephardim. The unifying factor across all the differences within the global Jewish community has always been the concept of Israel, and now I believe is very much the reality of the Jewish state. And the support for the Jewish state is something that is common across all, even those who may position themselves against the Jewish state politically, often say that they are doing that out of love for Israel. And though there may be differences in the manner in which the issue is discussed, and certainly the current circumstances or politics of the country may be embraced, the core unifying factor is very much present. And that, of course, also ties in with the concept of Israel being a light unto the nations. And it's something I believe that the Jewish community around the world can be very proud of. It is certainly a power for good in the world. And we see that in it being unique as the only true democracy in the Middle East, as the protector of freedom of religion in the eternal capital of the Jewish state, Jerusalem, in the diversity and the multiculturalism that has succeeded in Israel, where in so many other cases it has yet perhaps to succeed in the same fashion. So on the basis of all of those positives, the uniqueness of the State of Israel and the real power for unity that it has across the Jewish community, it strikes me that there is a great deal that we have to develop across future generations, especially when we consider that an understanding of Israel and the current challenges that it faces is perhaps not always fully grasped by younger generations. We see the challenges across schools and universities and the misrepresentations around Israel and the challenges facing the Jewish state. And I think the challenges that we as a community therefore face are clear, because in combating those misrepresentations, in setting the record straight, and in ensuring that the positives about Israel are better communicated, I think we can further harness that power of identity around the State of Israel for Jewish unity for future generations to come. Thank you, Vlad.
So thank you for that powerful articulation of a Zionist case, which of course is a wonderful case. I should highlight the UK LFI, of which UK Lawyers for Israel, of which Natasha is a director, does wonderful work in terms of using legal recourse to defend Israel's rights and to make sure that anti-Semites and anti-Zionists don't get away with whatever they attempt to do with impunity. And they've done wonderful work. Kol hakavod. So now that we're on the topic of Zion, perhaps we'll jump over to Ariela, who I believe is in Eretz Israel. Ariela, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Ariela Di Aquino, and I'm from Rome, Italy. I am currently studying my master's degree in International Relations, Crime, Justice, and Security. And in my free time, I am also collaborating with the Italian Union of Jewish Students. And since like the day of August, like I am a member of the World Jewish Congress, Ronald Lauder Fellowship. And during like the last years, I had the possibility to start working with the Italian Union of Jewish Students and trying to understand which are the issues that we have to face, especially when in terms of unity and how to look like together when we need to face like common issues and fight anti-Semitism, for example. And so we saw that in reality, so overall, we really have the power, like there is a great power in being united, like Natasha said, and it's very important, something that is really crucial. And it's something that, yes, although we are all different, and we really have the power to keep ourselves together and to fight together common like issues. So, for example, we started with the Italian University students in trying to understand which were the fields in which there was more what's going on with my Wi-Fi today. And so we started to understand that in order to improve and to empower Jewish students, we had to work in all kinds of fields that can connect our daily life with like the life of our Jewish community and with the life of like international Jewry. So for this reason, we started not only to organize events and work to foster like this process, but now we are also starting to work directly with universities. And in order to do that, we are like developing a program that is aimed to understand the issues of young students and teaching them how to fight like all the possible difficulties that they might found inside the university connected to anti-Semitism and all the issues related to it. And we saw that in reality, the identity, it's something that it's very strong in any one of us. Like everyone has its own idea of what is Judaism for him or her. And this is something very important. But at the same time, we noticed that in some cases, there are difficulties in showing to the others what the identity is. Especially in the last months, we saw like an incredible effect of what was going on in Israel to the life of European Jews. And so for this reason, things like have events like this really influence the way people present to the non-Jewish community. So for example, in this community, I saw that there is a kind of like a fear in really showing our values and our identity. And this is sometimes like an obstacle because it's an obstacle between like us and the others. And this like now we would like to focus on. So we would like to give the people the tools to really understand how to deal with their own identity and how to develop it, how to connect it in a stronger way also to their beliefs, and then to put everything into practice in order to not feel any more afraid of showing the really character of who they are. And we are trying to do it by, for example, like creating a workshop and seminars where to educate people about how to talk in public, how to make people understand some cultural values we have, how to really face issues that we found every day, like prejudices towards, for example, the milah or like the kasherut, and in order like really to show them who we are. And I think in this way, this could be like a good way to either like create a new network of students who are really now ready to not just to face their own identity, but also to show it to the public, but also from the non-Jewish perspective to understand more about who we are.
Amazing. Thank you, Ariela. They do say Italians are very fashionable. I want to highlight the shirt you're wearing. It's this. This is good branding. So on the topic of the World Jewish Congress, so I'm sure people know, but the World Jewish Congress represents over 100 Jewish communities globally. We are by far the largest organization of this kind. And especially for the young people listening and watching, whether you are a young professional and potentially a candidate to be a Jewish diplomat, whether you're somebody who is younger and could be part of the next generation program, under President Lauda's leadership, the WJC has very proactively reached out to young people and empowered them in leadership roles such as Ariela, which is wonderful. And especially for smaller communities where that support infrastructure may not exist in a fully developed fashion for younger people locally, we would love to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out to me or to anybody else on this call or to any of the officers of the World Jewish Congress and really use us as a resource. Ariela mentioned the word fear. And I think it's very, very important that no Jews live in fear. And Jewish identity should be a positive force, a source of strength, and something that we let shine. So if you need support in that aspect, hopefully the World Jewish Congress can help and sustain. Okay, wonderful. So we'll go back to the UK. Sarah, the floor is yours.
So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this important conversation. And I'm very sorry I can't be there in Moscow with you today, but it is an honor to be a part of this panel this morning. And yes, as mentioned, my name is Melis Yashat, and I'm a final year international relations undergraduate student at King's College London, but originally I'm from Helsinki, Finland. And I'm speaking here today also as part of the Ronald S. Lauder Fellowship with the World Jewish Congress. And when approaching this topic, I think we must first think about what Jewish identity is and what it means. And I think very often Jewish identity is primarily linked to the practice of Judaism and stuff like how we pray, how we celebrate holidays, what we eat, essentially what makes our actions distinctively Jewish. And when we turn the conversation to unity, this interpretation of Jewish identity can often lead us down a very complicated road. As we know, the Jewish community globally is very wide and diverse and representing multiple different national identities. This has led to there being various ways to identify oneself as Jewish. And lately, we have seen an increase in friction within our global community surrounding this very topic. Questions like who qualifies as a Jew, what is the correct way to practice Judaism, who is welcome in our communities and who is not. And these questions sometimes can cause even more division than unity. And with such divide, sometimes we can even go as far to question, is there such a thing as a single Jewish identity? And thankfully, the answer is yes. And the way I think we should define it makes all the difference in how Jewish unity presents itself and how we can make it as strong as it can be. And it is important to seek Jewish identity in the core values that we share rather than in the practice itself, such as education and responsibility for one another. And I believe that today, with the sad reality of ever-increasing security threats towards our global community, it is as important as ever to identify these common values and solidify our unity through advocating for these values together. And we as a global community must put in the effort to ensure that all people who identify themselves as Jewish from all paths of life feel included in our community. And Jewish unity through such an identity will allow our communities to thrive and face any challenges coming our way in the future.
That's a strong positive note to end on. Thank you, Melis. So we'll actually go to Russia. I'll hand over to Henri. And Henri, I hope you're feeling better and feeling well.
Greetings, my name is Henri Chikashvili, and I come from Moscow Hillel. And basically, I could say that yesterday I was also a presenter at the panel discussion related to the leadership and Jewish leaders, and it's really intersecting with our today's agenda, because really everybody has seen this, the ones who have this vivid identity, broad identity, and the ones who are helping to show the identity in other Jews. But if we speak about the identity, about unity per se, we need to say that the unity of Jews, on the example of our Moscow Hillel, Moscow community, it provides people to be happy while communicating to each other, while being at each other's side, because they are aware that there are the other Jews there, and that in Russia, in the CIS, we are facing now the problem because the guys who are of the Jewish origin, they just don't know about that they are Jews until the age of 18 and so on. And this is a very long established practice here. When the people in CIS get to know about their grandfathers, grandmothers on both sides of their genealogy, when they become teenagers or even adults. And this is a problem, really, because this problem is envisaged by our community, and it is also affecting our community. And this is providing for a special tone on how we're working with this. We're telling the guys about the basics of Jewish life, about the key events, about the key holidays, about the Jewish language, about the history of the development of Jews in our region here, and generally about the Jews in the whole world. Henri, I beg your pardon right now. Do we have a simultaneous interpretation right now? Because the panelists are saying there is no simultaneous interpreting. Could you please check it right now? Yes, we have interpreting. I hope it's good. We have the interpreting. Yeah, great. Thank you. So now again and again, I will just sum this up for the panelists who have joined our discussion right now. We have now the problems in the CIS, the people who are living on the post-Soviet space and who have Jewish heritage, they don't know that they are Jews. Until the age of 18, for example, as time comes by, they know that they had a grandmother, the grandmother had another name, for example, and these guys need to be taught on who are the Jews, on what is the Jewish life that was supported by their grandmothers, grandparents, why did they bake challahs, what is Shabbat, and all this needs to be discussed for them to release their identity. Okay, but why they need this identity? This Jewish identity is just showing them who and what part of them is coming from which place, and they are having more protection, they are getting more protection, and getting to know about their Jewish heritage, about Jewish story, and about what kind of Jews they can be. They just become more happier. And identity in the framework of CIS is this internal happiness that people are getting just being aware of their Jewish heritage. Thank you, Henry. I think I'm also representing here and the CIS because I see that you are here in Moscow and Hillel is in Moscow. This is a wonder. This is a miracle, really. And this matters of Jewish identity living on. I think I will speak English because this will be more interesting for the others.
The miracle of the Russian Jewish modern Renaissance and the identity that the Jews in Russia reacquired after decades of brutal repression, where all the standard rites of passages, Brit Milah, Kashrut, shul attendance, celebration of basic Hagim, all of that was illegal, and people would face sanctions if they engaged with that. The resurgence of the Jewish identity is extraordinary, and actually it's presaged in the Torah. So when Jacob, one of our patriarchs, blesses his children, the blessing he gives to Judah, to the tribe of Judah, his son, and to the tribe of Judah is to be like a crouching lion. So what does that mean? So a lion is a wild animal that cannot be tamed. So a lion can stand strong and proud, and everybody knows he is the king of the jungle. But he can also crouch. But even when he's crouching, at any second, he can spring into action. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe compared that to the Jewish soul. So Soviets can suppress Jews for decades, eliminate all vestiges of Jewish practice, and yet the second there is a modicum of relaxation, 2 million Russian Jews come back as proud Jews, even if they don't always know what it means to be a Jew. And that was certainly the case for my family. But I think on the topic of identity, we have this extraordinary, grand social experiment in Russia where for almost a century, everything Jewish was erased, and yet the identity, even if it wasn't clearly defined, remained very, very strong. And I think that's something that everybody who is engaged in the Jewish world should have some cognizance of. And obviously, I'm very happy that it happened the way it happened. And hopefully, outside of pandemic, when you all have a chance to come to Moscow and see the extraordinary vibrancy of Jewish life here. And actually, as I'm saying this, a gentleman who was born here, studied in Manchester, and then became a rabbi, just walked in. So, case in point. Rav Pinhas, good to see you. Okay. Let's go back to the second half of our topic today, unity. So in some interpretations, peace, shalom, which of course presupposes unity, is an even higher value in Judaism than truth. Perhaps I'll hand over to the panelists to talk about examples of where they have seen the power of Jewish unity, or whether you have created or participated in events that foster Jewish unity and perhaps bridge some of the differences that we touched on earlier. So, who wants to go first before I select? Ariela.
So, I was, when you asked the question, I don't know, I saw like my last years going in front of my eyes, because I think in the last year, especially after the end of the high school, I had really the possibility to explore different communities around the world. And it was really incredible to see, like, sometimes really people connected, although when at the end our background, our language, and also sometimes our culture is a little bit different. So I think it's simply amazing to see that at the end, like, we all as Jews share a lot of things. Like, we share our heritage and our belief, and this is something that I think it's really making us feel united and connected. And I think it's beautiful. So, for example, I was thinking that I studied I had the opportunity last year to study like in Venice, that is always in Italy, like in the north, very beautiful. In Bologna, like another city in Italy. In Israel, in Tel Aviv, where I am now, and in the United States. And in all the places where I've been welcomed in an amazing way by all the communities. And so I really felt like I had my home everywhere I went. Like, everywhere I went, there was always someone ready to welcome me. And this is something that is special and I think also unique. And also, like, with like initiatives like the one promoted by the World Jewish Congress, like, it was amazing for me to find myself in a program with people coming from all over in the world. Like, we have different issues, but at the end we are all connected by the same values, and this is, I think, something that is very important. So, yeah.
The global network of Judaism is extraordinary. And I often feel like I meet somebody for the first time, and after 30 seconds, it feels like they're an old friend because the points of reference are so very powerful. Maybe, Melis, let me ask you about some examples, especially coming from a country that, you know, few naturally associate with Judaism, even though I know Finnish Jews. I think you mentioned you're from Helsinki. Maybe talk about the dynamic around identity and unity there, and perhaps also, I don't know if there are Jewish communities outside of Helsinki. I imagine those are really small.
Yes, definitely. So the Jewish community in Helsinki, I think there's about 1,500 of us, so a very, very small community. And there is also a community in Turku, Finland, and also even smaller community. So I think for us, the unity comes from, as Ariela mentioned, and as I said earlier, from these core values. For us, it sometimes can be very difficult with a small community because sometimes when there are differences in the way you practice Judaism and you have a small community, you have to find a way for the community and the community center to feel welcoming for everyone and from every path of life and from every path of Judaism. So I think for us especially, it's very important to welcome everyone in as they are and to celebrate those core values that we have together. And I have to agree with Ariela that it's been amazing then venturing out into the global Jewish community, especially for myself, coming to the UK. It's such a different kind of Jewish world here, and it is very, very nice to see and kind of, well, not compare, but be a part of something new as well. So yeah.
Thank you. So I love how everybody is so positive, which obviously is very good. So let me perhaps throw a little issue out. So let's maybe address some of the things that, do the opposite of uniting us. So what are the centrifugal forces rather, that threaten Jewish identity, threaten our unity? Natasha, maybe you want to kick off, and I don't know if you have thoughts on how to fix these or address these. Over to you.
Thank you. Before I do that, Vlad, if I may just stay on the positives just for a moment, because just before the pandemic, I had the great privilege of being invited to Finland and being hosted in Helsinki as part of a conference called Focus Israel. And I have to say, what impressed me so much in my time in Finland was the support that was given to that very small Jewish community and the pro-Israel community by a very supportive Christian community. They had, in fact, organized this conference. We met with the Bishop of Helsinki to discuss issues within the Finnish political system and also within the church in Finland that weren't so supportive of Israel. But it was incredibly heartwarming and it feels like a lifetime ago in the days that international travel was very much easier than it is today, to see the unity outside of the Jewish community, in Finland in particular, that was very supportive of Jewish values and of Jewish identity as well. So the positives being central to
Sorry,
yeah.
Natasha. If I may just add, I think it's a fascinating point and often not under-addressed. So people know about the American evangelicals who support Israel, evangelical Zionists. Actually, across Europe, Brazil, China, there are tens of millions of actively Zionist Christians. I think it's less developed in the UK, unfortunately, organizationally, although there are efforts. But across Europe, there are people who contribute, usually small money, but subscribe to pro-Israel newsletters and active, think about Israel regularly, support everything that Jews do and that Israel does. And we never hear about it. So a lot of the headlines are how, people are broadly anti, and this country has this anti-Semitism barometer, etc., etc. But there is also a huge civil society component that religiously motivated or for other reasons are ardent supporters. And it sounds like you met some of them in Finland. Back to you, Natasha.
And while we're on it, last week I was also in Dublin at the invitation of the Ireland Israel Alliance, which is run by a very similar community of very supportive Christians that work very closely with the Jewish community in Dublin, led by Maurice Cohen. And so those relationships and that synergy within each individual community is very important, I think, to embrace, to leverage those sorts of partnerships and to build bridges, not just within the Jewish community, but also from the Jewish community out to the local communities in which those Jews live. Vlad, you've asked about the things that divide us, and I touched upon that briefly.
Or attempt to divide us, Natasha.
Or attempt to divide us, that we must indeed push back upon. It's interesting because there is, of course, a negativity that we are consistently faced with, and unfortunately, I think increasingly so, and that is anti-Semitism and attacks on the Jewish community. And just to provide a foil to the divisions, I do think that those, certainly in my experience, so the last 20 years of being in this field, those attacks and the demonization and the othering, to use sort of modern terminology, of the Jewish community and of Israel do, in my experience, have the effect of bringing people together, which is an incredibly powerful experience and gratifying to see. We have initiatives like UK Lawyers for Israel, like the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism in the UK and across the world, similar organizations that involve pulling the community together to stand firm and push back against those sorts of attacks. Now, increasingly, they are of a physical nature, and we have seen that especially over the last 6 months in response to developments in Israel. For example, in May, the last conflict with Hamas, I think there was a significant uptick, which has been documented by Jewish organizations around the world. But I think it came together with a resurgence of unity amongst Jewish communities and in standing firm and pushing back against that. To pick up specifically on the divisions that threaten us, I think perhaps the most concerning is of a political nature, and it comes to the fore in the form of anti-Zionism. And it is finding fertile ground, unfortunately, even amongst certain aspects of the Jewish community around the world. And that is of great concern because it involves an abandonment of, I think, so much of what is positive about Jewish community life and about Israel. And it strikes me when I ask myself, why does this curry favor within the Jewish community? Why is it finding so much fertile ground, especially amongst universities and some Jewish youth groups? And we'll all be familiar with trips that are organised to Israel with a firm sort of anti-Israel ethos and connection to them that are specifically targeting young Jews around the world. So if I ask myself, why is it finding so much favor within certain aspects of the Jewish community? And it's a very difficult question to answer. And I think it comes down to some of the sentiments, actually, that Vlad, you were expressing as to what the Russian community experienced not so long ago. A dampening of Jewish culture, of Jewish spirit. I see it, especially in the UK, mostly emanating from those that wish to assimilate is perhaps not the right word, but certainly play down a Jewish identity and be seen to criticize Israel and set themselves apart from Israel. At least over here, the phrase that it is used to describe that sort of sentiment is perhaps as a Jew. And the as a Jew criticism of Israel, I say criticism is perhaps not the right word because it links to those sorts of misrepresentations and the misinformation that I was talking about earlier with respect to the Jewish state that is being circulated. Well, the real concern is that so much of that is emanating from elements of the Jewish community. And I think that means that we have to exhibit so much more unity and pick up the mantle of pushing back against those misrepresentations and that misinformation. And the reason that is so important is because when there are elements of the Jewish community that are propagating misinformation, it becomes an awful lot easier for politicians, community groups, influence groups outside of the community to jump on that bandwagon. And it starts to blur the lines around anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. It starts to try and create some sort of division between the two. And that creates, I think, a very hostile environment for the Jewish community and the pro-Israel community as a whole. So in the divisions that we potentially see emerging along sort of fault lines in terms of politics and in terms of Israel and the challenges that it faces today ought to, Vlad, in my humble opinion, cause us to redouble our efforts to push back against misrepresentations, to push back against this notion of anti-Zionism, which essentially is the notion that Israel doesn't have a right to exist as a Jewish state, that Jews shouldn't have self-determination. That is an inherently anti-Semitic context and anti-Semitic notion. And if we allow there to be positions taken on that, even within the Jewish community, without voicing our opposition against it, I see that potentially leading to further divisions within the community itself. And that is something we should be very careful to guard against.
Thank you. So anti-Semitism has always been a paradox in many, many ways. But one of the ways in which it's paradoxical is the impact on our community. So we heard yesterday on the youth leadership panel from the people who run WUJIS and EUJS, so the global and the European Jewish Student Organization, so they know, but how many students become activists and leaders because they're activated by the perception and the experience of anti-Semitism. And as tragic and as unnecessary, as wrong and contemptible that experience is, the outcome actually is better Jewish leaders. And it is a paradox. Clearly, we don't wish for for any anti-Semitism. We wish all these guys go. As a Russian, I know that's impossible. And I think you guys know that as well. But there is a kind of silver lining, which is that it forges Jewish leaders by fire, and that's been true sadly, from Moses onwards. So the second part of what you were saying around politics, maybe let's touch on, I guess, politics and modernity, the contemporary world in general. Where do you feel within yourself and observing your peers the tension between Jewish identity and all the competing factors in your lives? Андрей, может быть, начнем с вас?
Thank you for the question. It's an interesting one, and I'll try to answer this in full. So today, for the Russian reality, we see that one of the key factors of identity of Jews is that, as we have repeatedly said, the Jewish life has been prohibited in the territory of the former Soviet Union, and this led to the fact that at least a great number of mixed marriages were happening, and there were a great number of children with Jewish grandparents or parents, but not according to Allah, and this led to division. So the notion of Jewry, at least in postmodern world, in terms of the Jewish laws, has great discrepancies because people feel like they are Jews, but there are doubts about how they can identify themselves in the communities, in particular in Moscow communities or in other cities across Russia. Then there are student organizations that work to raise awareness about all people, Jews and non-Jews alike, those with Jewish parents or grandparents. As for the political part of your question, here, at least in Russia, there are no significant problems with being a Jew. I think, on the contrary, in general, we see a tendency that calling yourself a Jew, belonging to Jew, is something trending. It usually a positive thing about your status, a selling point, and the Jewish lifestyle attracts more and more young people. As for one more dividing factor is the lack of communication with international Jews, with Jews from other countries, with communities of other countries, especially, I mean, here, offline communication. If today we can have a great talk here in Zoom, unfortunately, most of my peers cannot allow this because there are not so many programs like this. Of course, if we had more, then the identity and perceiving yourself as a Jew would have increased, because the youth would understand that being Jew is not only about having Jewish parents and grandparents, not only about meeting people in Hillel, but it's also about Jews across the globe who understand you, about, for example, how you celebrate Shabbat, or who can share your understanding of festivals, the history of the Jewish people. You can discuss history with them, ask them questions, perhaps even religious ones, and religious divisions, and this is something that we lack. We invite you to London for offline communication, and we'll invite other panelists too, or have conferences here, and we'll come to Moscow.
In Russia, Ariela, is it cool to be a Jew in Italy?
Okay, yeah, like I think our community is an amazing community with an amazing history. I'm very proud of being an Italian Jew, because the story of our community starts more than 2,000 years ago, when the Tito army brought Jews in Italy, and from that moment, Jewish life have never left Italy. So this is something that is very special. And also now we see that the Italian Jewish community has something like a characteristic feature. For example, we don't consider ourselves Ashkenazi or Sephardi, and we are just Italian. And I think this is something very special and unique. So yes, it's very beautiful to be Jews in Italy, although we have also our challenges. We are starting to see an increasing of anti-Semitism. But fortunately, our situation is under control, especially compared to other places in Europe. So yeah, we all invite you to come to visit all the Italian Jewish community.
Amazing. I know the kosher food in Rome on that one street full of kosher restaurants is outstanding. So for those who keep kosher and like good food, actually cheap as well compared to London. Oh my God. Okay. Melis, maybe tell us a little bit about Finland. And also, you know, when you live in a place like London or Berlin or whatever, it's tempting to group the Scandinavian countries together. Is that how you feel as a Finn? Is there a natural affinity to other Scandinavians, or is that a myth? And also among the Jewish communities?
Well, it's not a myth. We are a small community, and we do work together a lot with other Nordic communities. Just on this fellowship, we have another fellow who is from Sweden, and we're working very much together to hopefully host a Nordic seminar for young professionals in the Jewish world in the Nordics. So looking forward to that very much. Yeah, so not a myth at all. I think if it's okay, I'd like to touch upon kind of the previous points that were made, especially about the kind of political side of it. And also, I mean, anti-Semitism in Finland, I think it is mostly a hidden thing. It is not something you will see very often, very much. And as a Jew in Finland, I think I feel very safe. But I think definitely there's an increase, as in the rest of the world. You can see that in Finland too. So, but like Ariela said of Italy, I think it's under control for now, I'd like to say. But I think that the political aspect of it is very interesting. And I think especially with kind of seeing kind of what Natasha was saying about kind of the youth, and maybe the youth sentiments being very different. I think in the UK, especially comparing to the UK, where the Jewish community is huge, it is very kind of easy and maybe not as dangerous to make those separations. Whereas in a small community, it can be very alienating if you take certain political stances or certain political stances within a Jewish community. It should center more around those maybe common values that we have because of this. Because for us, losing even 1-2 people because of a certain kind of way of Judaism or even political stance, it's a big hit for us. Like, we're a very small community, and we need to keep the people that we can. And I think kind of taking very strong sentiments can lead then to kind of the youth disappearing. And I know that mixed marriages were also mentioned earlier. And I think that's also in Finland, that is very, very common. Like, for me also, I know very many European Jews who their entire friendship group is pretty much Jews. For me, that's never, ever been the case. I've always had friends who are not Jewish, and most of my friends are not Jewish. And even though I've been to a Jewish school. And I think that in a small community is very much highlighted. And I think it needs to be accepted a lot more. And I think that's something that surprised me, maybe coming to the UK, is that maybe there is a certain kind of, not stricter, but a more molded way of kind of doing things. And so I think, considering small communities, it's very important that we really do accept everyone as they want to be Jewish, because every sentiment of being Jewish is an asset for us and an asset for our community.
Judaism has never been a numbers game. So we know, obviously, Hazal say to save one life is to save the entire world. So it's never been 2 versus not. It's, you know, every Jewish soul is important. I think that's fundamental and actually a core part of our identity. Let's make it a bit personal. Would love to hear from the panelists the inspirations, whether it's people or symbols or other things that played a very powerful role in the discovery and strengthening of your own Jewish identity. So maybe, Henri, I'll go. We'll do the opposite of ladies first on this question, and then we'll go to the ladies. Henri.
Thank you. It's a great question. As for my personal experience and identity, I'll start off with the bottom, from the least important to the most important. So the Jewish culture, the many centuries, many thousand years culture is something that allows me to feel Jewish every day, because you can emerge endlessly into this history, into these cultural layers, and you can explore every day something new, especially given the number of various Jewish communities across the globe. You can learn about their culture, their languages and history, their customs that differed from others, but still they were leading to the same avenue, leading to Jerusalem. This is a great opportunity to explore. Also, you learn something new about your own self, and you highlight things about yourself that you never paid attention to before or never realized. The second, that is learning, that is informal Jewish education, so self-development, that is getting prepared to pass knowledge to other Jewish people around me. It's about giving them the same impetus as a Jew to achieve something and to explore yourself as a Jew. And the last, these are the Jewish people with whom I work, for whom I build programs. These are people around me. This is something that explores me and shows me as a Jew. Thank you. Kol hakavod to your work.
Let's go to you with the same question, and make it personal, not conceptual. I know you are an amazing abstract thinker, but let's make it personal and at the core.
Okay, forgive me, I didn't realize you were posing that question to me, Vlad. There's a slight delay. Personal. Well, I suppose it doesn't get more personal than my connection to the Jewish state, going back 8 generations. And for me, that has always been a central part of the importance of Judaism and Israel to me. Ariela Di Hausdorf came to Jerusalem in 1847.
Так, моя семья приехала.
Forgive me if there's some feedback. He raised money in the German Jewish community. He came from a village near Leipzig, and he built a great deal in the old city of Jerusalem. Some of it is still functioning, including Rothschild House, which I believe now is a school in the old city. And that has always been of serious importance to me and my family history going back so long in Israel. I remember for the 50th birthday of the State of Israel, I asked how it could be. Coming from the UK, being born in London, there was never a question as to, how long the United Kingdom had been a state, or at least it wasn't celebrated in the same way that we were celebrating Israel's 50 years. And very young, as I was at the time, I was asking, how can it be that there wasn't an Israel, and then suddenly there was an Israel? My father's method of explaining it to me was to talk about David Ben-Gurion and to explain that this man had created the state, or had declared the state, and that Israel had followed that. I was shown a photograph of Ben-Gurion, and at the time he was on a film set. He was standing next to my grandfather, and I recognized, the closeness and the smallness, I suppose, of the state of Israel, the fact that everyone is intimately connected with it, and it is really a real manifestation of the Jewish life and the Jewish community coming together. And of course, its importance is underscored on the basis that it is so integral to the security of the Jewish community. Coming back to perhaps some of the issues that Melis was raising, it strikes me that especially in my experience in the UK, the battle that Jewish students are having to face on university campuses is undoubtedly something that solidified, sticking with the personal, solidified the importance of Jewish identity for me, because I understood at a very early stage, and I think probably around the age of 11 when I got to my secondary school, which was it was a very nice school. It was very intellectual. It's got an incredible reputation in the UK, but along with that came a real anti-Israel sentiment. It wasn't a Jewish school. There was one other Jewish girl in my year. And I recognized pretty early on, and it's interesting that you say, you know, the fire that creates Jewish leaders. I don't necessarily put myself in that bracket, but it certainly gave me an impetus and a notion that this is something, these values, the truth about Israel was all something that needed to be fought for. And it is integral, I think, to the work that UK Lawyers for Israel are doing, especially on university campuses. And I am privileged to be able to work with students that are at university now that are so brave. Many of them are affiliated with organizations like Stand With Us or Camera, but some of them, if one in particular I'm working with at the moment is the only individual in her whole institution that is pushing back against appalling things that are coming from the course curriculum and the materials that she's been presented with by tutors that promote the modern blood libel. And that is also feeding into my personal experiences of unity and of knowing what it is that we need to push back on. Of course, here, those in the audience and on the panel may be aware of recent instances, for example, at the London School of Economics, where Ambassador Tzipi Hotovely was hounded from the university after having given her speech, which was well received by those in the audience. Those protesting outside were shouting appalling things, but also there was an instance that was a lot of incitement over social media to frighten the ambassador, to break her car window. And I think we're seeing that sort of step up into violent incitement across universities within the UK. I'm sure that's reflected, or if it hasn't already, then it will be soon reflected even more at university campuses around the world. It's worth remembering that the birthplace of the BDS movement was very sadly the United Kingdom. And I think we here have a habit of exporting that sort of anti-Jewish and anti-Israel sentiment to campuses around the world. And I think our colleagues in America have been experiencing very similar phenomena. But you can see the trajectory coming out of the UK and filtering around the rest of the world, or at least that's how it feels from within this jurisdiction. So that's, you know, my own few pennies worth in terms of historically, personally, where the Jewish identity has felt strongest, and how in response to those sort of constant attacks, not just when I was at university, but I can recognize it's become so much worse through my interactions and my work with students on campuses at the moment, that really it's, you know, as you say, formed in the fire of that particular battle.
So an ancestor who built Yerushalayim and a grandfather who took selfies with Ben-Gurion. It's a pretty good legacy. I think what you said about university campuses is key. This is the battle line today. Actually, and not just for Jews. I mean, if you look at the wokeism in the US and the reaction of students and parents alike, it's really the fault line in our society, because for whatever reason, academia is so disconnected from broader society today. And I'm not sure they're leading. I think that it's pretty retrograde in many, many respects. And I really hope that students don't feel alone. And again, please reach out. I have not been a student in a long time, but at Oxford I was very involved in these things. And if anybody, panelists probably have the right access and resources already, but if anybody is listening and you feel like you're not getting enough support, we would love to help. We would love to direct you towards people who can help, because students should have the ability to tap into support networks. There are legal rights. There are clear governance guidelines of what can be done, what cannot be done, and often these are violated, but often recourse is available. I know in the UK, where I've spent a lot of time with government officials on this topic, from ministers to members of parliament, the government on the whole has been very supportive, and there have been significant victories, albeit not without struggle, on these issues. Students are key. It's the time when people's identities, intellectual outlooks, and sort of ideological perception of the world is forged. Very few people are great enough to change their minds on major things after probably the age of 25. It's something we don't talk about, but it's kind of true. So not missing that window, that all-important window, is critical. And again, please go out of your ways to help others. Make sure you are being helped. And if we can be helpful as the World Jewish Congress, as individuals, as Jews, I think this is a prime battleground. I'm not sure that anything is more important. But let's go back to inspiration. So Melis, let's go back to you. And again, I think it's fascinating that in a smaller community, maybe you have fewer role models to choose from, but those that exist are probably have a more poignant, intimate, and significant impact.
Yes, definitely. We all know each other. It's, small communities. It's very, very tight knit group of people, I feel, who take on those leadership roles, which can also be a bit problematic, because then it's the same kind of 100 people who are doing all the things. And I think that can also be a bit of a negative. But if we focus on the positives and inspiration, I think for me, the community, I went to the Jewish school, so that's like 1st to 9th grades, and also before that, the preschool. And it's such a unique, special thing in such a small country to be in a community that is different from most people. And I think for me, there's that certain kind of that unity has just really been highlighted from a young age. And I think it's, for me, always been more of a safety net to bounce off of, maybe, more than a kind of, I've been lucky enough to maybe not experience that fire that Natasha was also mentioning, that kind of inspiration for leadership would have stemmed from that. I think for me, it stemmed from unity and cooperation and having a community that I wanted to cherish and that I wanted to make sure continues existing.
Hallelujah. And I mean, that's obviously a far better source of everything. May that continue.
Yes, let's hope so. And yes, but I think I must say that once I've gotten older, it has been a very awakening experience to see, for instance, other European Jewish communities and how anti-Semitism is lived there, and especially talking with the other fellows on this program. I think that sometimes I have maybe even been a bit kind of I can't find the term in English now. In Finnish, we say blue-eyed, kind of maybe oblivious, maybe to.
I don't know if we have a simultaneous translation from Finnish on this call.
Sorry. Yes, but it's kind of haven't realized how serious it really can be, and I think now it is stemming more from a will to kind of fight as well. So I'm simultaneously kind of fighting against what is trying to divide us, but still working from that unity and from that kind of good place. And I think it's always better to work for something rather than against something. And I'm trying to kind of focus on that and really work for our community and yeah, keep that kind of mindset.
Absolutely. Our job is to spread the light. The darkness will take care of itself. Ariela, we'll give you the concluding word. Talk to us about sources of Jewish inspiration in your life.
So differently from Melis, like I've never like attended a Jewish school in my life. Like I attended all like secularized classes and I was always the only Jew inside the whole school. So I felt my identity was connected to Judaism because my parents educated me. I was like in Ben Akiva, so in any case, I had like an introduction about of course, I had like an education that was Jewish education, and I felt like connected to Israel. But I think what happened, that was like something, but at that point of my life, at the beginning, I was not thinking about being involved in with Jewish communities. Like I was considering Judaism like a private aspect of my life, and that's it. But then what happened is that I started to look around, and I saw around me a lot of people that were very motivated in trying to make a change in the reality where we live. And I found that very, very inspirational. And I started really to admire them. And I said, okay, like, I don't know what point I can reach, but I want to try to do my best. So that is the thing that really motivated me. So I'm really thankful to all the Jewish activists around the world and around Europe. Like, their impact in me was really great.
Wonderful. So I'd like to thank the panelists. I'd like to thank everybody watching. I think it's clear Jewish identity and Jewish unity are central to our lives. I think the most important thing is to be proud Jews, because that inspires, that strengthens our identity and inspires others. And the more leadership roles we all collectively take upon ourselves, I think the better, the more united, the stronger the Jewish people ultimately will be. So let me conclude by saying, Am Israel Chai. Thank you all, and wishing you a wonderful day. Thanks.